It's great to be joined today by Liz Swavola, who is a senior program associate at the Vera Institute of Justice and also one of the authors of the recent report, Overlooked: Women in Jails in an Era of Reform. Liz, it's so great to talk to you. Prisons and jails are often considered a sort of men's issue. The so-called men's rights movement often talks about it in that context. But you studied another angle of incarceration in the US, which is that we've seen a 14-fold increase in women in the correctional population over the last just under 45 years. What's driving that increase? Let's start sort of at the very top level.
Yeah, well, first, thanks so much for having me and for your interest in the report. As you said, we've seen a 14-fold increase in the number of women in jails. That's local, county, municipality-run facilities. And most of those people are pre-trial. So they've been arrested, but they haven't been convicted of anything. They're awaiting the resolution of their cases. And one thing that was really surprising in our research is that despite this dramatic growth, we don't still, to this day, know what's really driving it because there hasn't been much research specific to women. What we were able to find in our research about women kind of in the criminal justice system more generally is that an increasing focus on low-level, nonviolent offenses has really swept a large number of women into the system.
And when we talk about nonviolent offenses, I mean, I think because of what we've experienced within the war on drugs, oftentimes people's minds, when they hear nonviolent offenses, they think of sort of drug use, for example, possession, etc. But really, when we talk about nonviolent offenses, it includes more than just that, doesn't it? I mean, talk to us about some of the other nonviolent offenses that are landing people in jail and prison.
Right. So yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of it is drug possession, so not sales specifically for women, and it's property offenses, public order offenses, things like loitering, disorderly conduct. So we're talking about really minor, low-level crimes.
Talk to us a little bit about the dynamic in terms of how the criminal justice system sort of accounts for the reality that in the US, women are more likely, mothers are more likely to be the caregivers for children than are fathers, and sort of how that is impacting and influencing the numbers that we're seeing in terms of female incarceration.
Yeah, so the system really doesn't account for that dynamic, unfortunately. About 80% of women in jails are mothers. Oftentimes they are single mothers. And quite frequently when they are ending up in the criminal justice system, it's related to efforts to kind of survive. So as we said, it's property crimes. It can relate to mental health and behavioral health. And when they're coming into the system, that impacts their entire families, especially their children. Visiting can be very difficult. Even staying in touch by phone can be prohibitively expensive. Many of these families are poor and low income, and it can be very difficult for mother and child to stay in touch.
When we think about the incarceration of mothers, there's sort of this vicious cycle that can develop where we know that a child who has one or two parents that have been in the system, are those children are more likely later on to end up in the system themselves. And there's this sort of vicious cycle that I've not really heard a particularly good explanation as to how it can be broken. But let me open up sort of that topic to you first. Talk a little bit about that, right? The impact that the incarceration of mothers has on the children, and whether you want to talk short, medium, and or long term, whichever way you want to go with it.
Yeah, so I mean, I think for children, when their parent, especially mother, is incarcerated, there can be a whole host of consequences. I mean, from the very first point of arrest, that can be incredibly traumatic for children. That can result in nightmares and stress and trouble at school. It's still an area of emerging research, really, what the long-term consequences are. But incarceration of children who have parents who are incarcerated has been, strongly correlated.
We know from having spoken to so many experts around these issues that when someone is incarcerated, they're often, to say rehabilitated is very, very far from the truth. They often come out of jail or prison actually more disadvantaged, less likely to ultimately find stable employment, etc. We know that generally. Does your report tell us anything more specifically about how that dynamic, the sort of furthering of the disadvantage, is affecting women who are incarcerated?
Absolutely. So when women come to jail, they're really experiencing a whole system with policies and practices that are designed for men. And that really does leave them worse off than when they came into jail. It can be anything as basic as hygiene, so having access to feminine hygiene products, having access to toilet paper, through to trauma. I mean, the jail experience can be incredibly traumatizing for women, many of whom have already experienced trauma in their lifetime. Nearly 90% have experienced sexual violence over the course of their lifetime. So when they come to jail and they are searched or shackled or held in solitary confinement, a lot of that trauma is re-triggered and can really leave them worse off. As well as financial consequences. Many women coming to jail are more disadvantaged even than their male counterparts. So about 60% of women who are in jail were unemployed before they came to jail. And so when they are leaving jail and they have all of these fines and fees that really rack up at every single point of the criminal justice process, they're even further economically disadvantaged.
This sort of gets us to one of the chicken egg discussions that often exists in these conversations, and I'll focus on the unemployment aspect of it because you brought it up. Some might hear this scenario, right? They hear you say incarceration rate of women has gone up so significantly. We also see 60% of women coming into the system are unemployed. So we should really be looking at arresting women less or changing laws in order to reduce the number of women arrested to begin with. Others will hear it and they'll say, well, the problem is really jobs, right? If we were able to grow employment and make it so that more women were employed and address the issues that exist there, that's just going to naturally reduce the number of women who end up in situations where they end up getting arrested. Is either of these approaches, does one or the other approach make more sense to you? Is it parts of both? Is it something else altogether?
Yeah, I think we really do need to look at both. I mean, incarceration is really a result of poverty, but also increasingly becoming a cause of poverty. We have to look at the very beginning of the system at arrest to think about ways that women can be diverted away from the criminal justice system so that they can engage in employment and education, treatment, they can stay with their families and maintain their housing. And think about, every step of the process, those opportunities to divert women away and to also reinvest in our communities instead of in incarceration to allow for more opportunities in the community. In so many of the communities that we work with here at the Vera Institute, very large amounts of their budget go towards incarcerating people. And I think we feel that those resources would be better spent creating more opportunities in the community.
Now, Liz, there will be some who hear our conversation and they'll say, I agree with everything that Liz is saying. We do need to be focusing on all of those areas in order to reduce female incarceration. But shouldn't it really apply to both men and women? In other words, why is it that, or not why is it, but do you feel that there is a particular need to focus on reducing female incarceration as a result of certain types of crimes or economic situations or whatever? Or are you sort of merely pointing out that it has increased more rapidly than male incarceration, but really we should be making sure that we're treating everybody in the same way? And I ask this sort of because I know many in the audience will hear our conversation, and that's the first question I'll get.
Yeah, it's a good point. So most of the people in jail are men. Women do make up a smaller percentage, but they are, as you touched on, the fastest growing population in jail. And we are in this moment of reform where local communities are rethinking the way that they use their jails. And we absolutely encourage that for all people, both men and women. There should be opportunities to stay in the community while also being held accountable. But what we're seeing is that as reforms are coming up and new innovations are created, such as diversion programs, they're not always focusing on women, and therefore aren't reaching as women to the extent that they're really reaching men. So it's important that we have conversations overall about reducing the use of jails, but there also be a specific focus on women to make sure that any reforms that are created are reaching them and providing them opportunities as well.
Last issue I want to touch on. If we had to point to one specific law enforcement initiative whose change might have the biggest impact, do you come to war on drugs and the status quo there?
You know, I think there are many different factors. I think the war on drugs has certainly contributed significantly to the number of women in jails. I think communities are increasingly just relying on their jails to provide services that should be provided by the community, behavioral health, mental health, substance use treatment. There's really, the jails are the mental health providers of last resort, and we need to rethink that and make sure that resources are available in the community to prevent people from ending up in jail.
We've been speaking with Liz Swavola, Senior Program Associate at the Vera Institute of Justice. The report is called Overlooked: Women in Jails in an Era of Reform. Liz, thanks so much for talking to us about this.
Thanks, David. My pleasure.